means you can join us in the circle.
Yeah.
In the weird oblong circle.
Okay, maybe. I just thought because of my work, because after playing frisbee.
Oh, you're fine.
Yeah. It's a short message, more or less. Supposedly, maybe. Anyway, so we're out of 2 Corinthians 9 tonight. 7 through 11.
2 Corinthians 9, you said?
Mm-hmm.
Hold on. It's loading.
Okay.
I'm sure it's apropos.
7 through 11.
Okay. 7-Eleven.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm hungry.
So it goes.
So it goes like this.
Each man should give what he has decided in his heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. And God is able to make all grace abound to you, so that in all things, at all times, having all that you need, you will abound in every good work. As it is written, He has scattered abroad his gifts to the poor, his righteousness endures forever. Now he who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will also supply and increase your store of seed, and will enlarge the harvest of your righteousness. You will be made rich in every way so that you can be generous on every occasion, and through us your generosity will result in thanksgiving to God. So for the context of it, just a little bit, about chapter 9, he was, what's the term? Paul was trying to get the church of Corinth to continue on with a gift that they were talking about giving. Hence the us thing. They had apparently made a promise to Macedonia, the church in Macedonia, to give a gift, and he was just encouraging them to continue doing that. And it even goes a little farther to explain that he was actually sending people to go and make sure that they did this, and even talking about it further. But for the specific stuff to talk about that God gave me for tonight, talking about the heart of giving, and even what Paul's talking about here with this specific chunk about each man should give what he has decided to in his heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. And it's a little fitting that this kind of thing comes in the context of just ending the series of messages about people-pleasing and about seeking validation, because there's a very real place for that when it comes to giving. And giving is a little broader than that, but the stuff that I was given with it to talk about was about the heart and the intentions of giving. See, on the one hand, like what Paul's saying about not giving out of compulsion, it's a real thing. Because one of the things that removes giving, and just for the sake of even sharing and hearing this message, defining giving means more than just like giving money or something like that. But we're also talking about giving time, giving whatever resources you have available to you, even your very person, your very service to other people. These are all examples of giving. Even functioning inside the gifts that the Holy Spirit has given you, that's giving, in that you are providing this for other people. You are giving to God even. And even to go further, giving these things to God, giving yourself to God, there's another element of that here. Because at the end of the day, to pull giving back in, to make giving about money or purely about resources in purely material terms is to take away what it is to give. To give is to surrender something to another, whatever that may be. It's something of yours that you are giving to another for their benefit, for their sake, in whatever way that may look. Now, the Church of Corinth was giving something material. I don't quite remember what it was, and frankly, don't recall them actually giving a explanation on that. Paul just talks about something that they promised to give. But for us, there's a very real place where a lot of these things that we give, a lot of the giving that we do, has a tendency to come out of so many different so many different heart positions, such as trying to provide for another, trying to serve another, trying to benefit another person. These can be fine, these can be good. But what can become problematic is when we remove the gift part of it and it becomes something that is compulsory. Or even just say, I put other words to it, specifically what I was even given to share about here was when it becomes dutiful, when it becomes an obligation. And even more so, yeah, we'll get to that. Anyway, see, the problem with it is that when we give, and any of those things that we just talked about, anything that is encompassed under the vast umbrella of what giving looks like, any of those things can be given out of obligation. Even talking about like giving to God, to give ourselves to Jesus, oftentimes it can become a transactional thing where what we do is we give ourselves to Him in order to get something from Him. We will give ourselves over, our hearts, for example, in order to get salvation. It's not an act of surrender, it's an act of transaction. We're trying to get something from Him. We want to be safe.
I think about Nehemiah, how at the end of his book, he always kept saying, God, I've done these great things for you, so don't forget me.
Right. And see, the thing of it is that the act of surrender, when we give something as a gift, we surrender our right to it, our right to anything from it. Even the idea of surrendering our hearts to God, we're oftentimes told throughout the scriptures they do use the word give. And giving our hearts implies this, as it simply being something that we are providing for God without request, without anything else. Even when we lay down our feelings, our experiences, our judgments, our idea or our identities, which is something that we've talked about so much in this group over years. When we're giving those things up, if we're purely giving them up in order to get something, then we've missed the point. And oftentimes that will inhibit our ability to receive. If it's an obligation, we're doing it purely because we're supposed to. And see, the problem about this, or the big problem with this, is that while duty is fine, while responsibility is fine, to say that, you know, it's somebody's duty or responsibility, it's really cold outside.
They just agree with you.
I guess.
It's joyful. Make him so right.
Anyway,
He prayed that there wouldn't be interruptions.
Doesn't always answer prayers.
He does.
anyway, the thing of it is even though there's nothing really bad about duty itself or responsibility, when it comes to a place of obligation or transaction, it removes the joy that can be had in it. There's a place where duty can be a joyful thing. It's when it's an honor to you to have that responsibility or that duty. Birthday parties. Anyway, that's something that can be lived in, where we can even receive from God the fact that He has honored us enough, or He is honored by us enough to give us something that honors us as a person. And even to just like give us a responsibility, that can be an honor where He's like, I trust you with this. I trust you to be this person, to take care of this person, to take care of this whole ministry. There are so many places where God can do this, and that is an honor to us. It becomes our responsibility, our duty, sure. but it is to be received as an honor. And in that same line, however, when we remove the honor from it, it becomes an obligation, it becomes a job. And it takes away the joy that can come from it.
Like the flip side of honor is shame.
Yes.
I thought you said Shane for a second.
Yeah, flip side is Shane.
Yeah. So
That
it
was a
can
bad moment.
so it can become the kind of thing where we remove the honor of it and it becomes just raw obligation, we start looking for the things that we're entitled to. It's a job at that point in time. See the difference, it's talked about in the Bible about how there's a difference between, doing something as a service. If you're doing it because you want to, it's great, it's fun, it's enjoyable. If you're doing something because you're supposed to, because you have to, because you're required to, it becomes a job and you start demanding payment. You start expecting something back. And even in terms of giving to God, giving ourselves to God even, we can fall into that same thing. Where we start feeling like not only do we want this something that we're supposed to get from Him, but we're entitled to it. And that sets us up for a very, very dangerous heart position that can actually put us in a place where we are directly opposed to God.
Yeah.
In the same token, when it's giving to community, when it's giving to friends, family, loved ones, when it's giving to just the church in general, it can have that same effect when it becomes the kind of thing that you can't take joy in anymore. When we're so removed from it, then it will set us in a position where we are actually opposed because it's no longer enjoyable. We no longer see the benefits of it. We no longer reap them because we've removed ourselves from a place where we can. It all comes down to how we walk in these things and how we receive from the Spirit. And even going back to some of the stuff about identity and about who we are in Christ. When we don't feel like we should be doing something, or rephrase that a little better. When we feel dishonored, we will oftentimes hold that idea. For example, even going back to that place of honor and not seeing it, if we can't receive the identity that God has given to us. For example, if Shane is called into a position of leadership at a church, and he knows that he's been called to it. He knows that God has specifically put it in front of him and said, this is what I trust you with. And in that, he doesn't believe that it's right for him to have that honor. If his self-judgments, if his identity is so based on what he's not capable of doing, that he can't see God or trust God or even walk with God in this, then it can become the kind of thing that divides him with God. Because suddenly it's on him, it's his responsibility, it's his burden to carry in taking care of this thing. It's no longer something that he's giving to, it's something that he's working on, it's something that he's striving through. And in that, he will stumble and he will struggle and he will eventually crumble. Because the truth of it is that this is something that he can only have in relationship with God. It's something he can only really do in relationship with God. Otherwise, it will strangle him. And this is the kind of thing where if we cannot receive that relationship, that trust, that honor, it will pull us out of a place of even being able to receive the gift, the honor, the joy.
I don't know if this is like a fitting thought, but like heaven wouldn't even be heaven if God wasn't there to enjoy it with you.
It's very fitting.
Yeah.
Because that's showing how relational giving is, no matter what it is that we give, our time, things, emotions even, attention, like all of it. If it's outside of relationship, what is it? It's just, yeah,
Or it's like
just
that saying, home is where the heart is, or whatever.
Home is where you make it.
Okay. Anyway, So, in this place, we have to consider where our hearts really are with things.
Mm-hmm.
We have to be honest about our intentions behind what we give, and even what we believe about giving. Because again, even to go back to the initial statement, we oftentimes make giving too linear of a thing. It becomes focused on material items, material objects.
Reductionistic thinking.
Yes, exactly. We're going to give money. That's giving. And that's where it ends. Everything else is loaded under something else.
Hmm.
So the first thing that we have to establish is what are we giving and why? Well, we're giving ourselves. At the end of the day, regardless of whatever those elements are, whatever the materials, the emotions, the whatever, it's parts of us that we're giving to others.
Yeah.
And then do we do that because we want to, or are we doing that because we're supposed to?
Yeah, like, are you being spent because it's your joyful service, or it's like some sort of communistic imposition?
Yes. Or even that it's just a requirement of you.
Yeah.
It doesn't even have to be, communist is one thing, but
That's
it
the
can,
opposite extreme I can think of.
it can become even like dictatorial,
Yeah.
where somebody's demanding that you do this. And oftentimes if we're real about it, our view of God is dictatorial. Like we do look at him on in the scope of saying, well, God's demanding this, so I'm going to do it. And we'll use other words, we'll use command, he's asking me to do this,
It's the
but,
angry giant in the sky.
but we treat it with the same kind of emotions that we would if like our government demanded it of us. Or our parents, or whoever has been the most tyrannical influence in your life, look at that, and the time that they told you to do something, think about your reaction, and then think about your reaction when you gave something to God because you were afraid of hell.
Yeah.
It's the same thing.
Do it or else.
There's a place where we don't always receive that whole perfect love casting out fear thing. We don't always live with that. And even going back to the idea of God taking pleasure in us, about him enjoying us and being pleased with us and living with that mindset, and how even that can be so transformative. So, even establishing that particular point, when we're giving of ourselves, do we look at it as something that we're supposed to do or something that we want to do? And do we even see it as something that's good? Or is it something that's a requirement?
I kind of look at it both, like you should and you want to. So,
Wish I had my prophecy to share right now, because it starts right in on that note.
Yeah. And that's good in a lot of ways. It's just that this is the place where we have to be honest about it, and even the way that we look at it, even if we don't give. If for some reason something comes up and we can't, or change our minds at the last minute, and then how we're going to respond to that. Because that ends up being the thing where we really see where we're really at. Like, I would love to, I can easily sit back and say that I give because I like to. And that's just not always true. Sometimes I give because I'm supposed to, or because I feel obligated to, or because there's some hellish fire and I have to go like protect or defend or whatever, and that's because that's just how I'm built. I'm not doing it because I want to, I'm doing it because I have to. Otherwise people are going to die. Spiritually speaking.
Oh,
What God showed me is that, like, what sound reasoning is there not to do it when you really consider all it entails?
Mm-hmm. But that still doesn't give a significant motivation. It's just like, it's
You have to
logically,
you have to unpack it all.
yeah, logically it's great, but does that actually make you want to?
Yeah, when you really know God.
Yeah.
I think it really goes down to the depths of your heart, how open or stubborn you are, basically. Like, I mean, God may tell you, you need to give, but if your heart's still stubborn, you're not going to. So.
This is true. There are also parts of it where All right, well, I guess we're going to go into that a little bit.
Yeah.
It's an interesting thing that you bring that up, because I guess we're going to go back to the entitlement thing a little bit. Because, see, the entitlement thing, the place where we start believing that we're owed something, oftentimes that goes back to I think it was a few months ago, maybe even further back, but we had one discussion some time ago where we talked about death. And we talked about the fear of death being such a significant driving force behind so much of why humanity is the way it is. And about how when we brought death into the world, it came with so many things like fear and doubt and anger and all these different things that really, anger in a way, wrath we'll say. This place, this survivalistic mindset that says I have to get what I can get in order to take care of myself, in order for me to be okay. And it doesn't matter about anybody else or anything else. All that matters is that I get what I want, or I get what I need. Want and need can actually intermesh very easily in that kind of mindset. And that's the thing, is it's very, very venomous. It's very dangerous. Because it sets us in a way where we're actually against other people. We're against the world itself. We'll be against God, because what it comes down to is what we feel we need. And when it comes down to this, when we do give something, it's always going to be transactional when our mindset is in that place still, where we're still in fear of death, punishment, torment, all those different things. This is why Jesus conquered the grave, was to free us of this. There's so much of the gospel that can only be appreciated when we're able to be separate from that fear. When death legitimately no longer has a bound on us in life. And even to be a cheerful giver, there is a part of this that has to exist inside our hearts and souls. Because otherwise it will come back to, I gave this, now I expect this back. And that will set us against. Yeah.
But then we're thinking just like primitive, primal cavemen.
Exactly.
So
We do that a lot.
are you kind of saying like you should give and never expect to receive?
No.
Or okay. I just want to make sure I'm on the same page as you.
What I'm saying is that our ability to give should not be contingent on what we will receive back,
Yeah.
In this life.
and even whether or not we will receive.
Or yeah, even
Well, yeah.
It's
Like-
perfectly fine to expect something back,
Mhm.
especially when there's like a service rendered and a transaction that has been established. However, when we're giving purely out of that place, purely out of the expectation that we will always receive something back, that's going to set us up.
Selfishness.
That is
Yeah, that's what I was
selfishness.
about to say.
And it will also set us up for, not only will it set us up to be opposed to people, but it will actually set us up for trauma.
Yeah.
Because there are so many times where, especially in the church, especially serving God's people, there are places where you will expect to receive from people, and you will not. You will expect community, and you will find rejection.
I've heard a good quote one time. It was like, I read it from a book, and it was one key to effective giving is to always stay open to receiving. Not necessarily like expect to receive, but like if your heart is to give but you're just like no, I don't expect anything back, but they're just saying be open to
Yeah.
receiving.
That can be a good barometer.
Yeah, exactly,
I
and
think,
that's not
for,
selfishness at all, because
Like how
like,
what our giving
you
is
know,
like.
if they don't receive, that's okay, but if they do receive, then don't be like, oh, no, it's fine, like, you know, 'cause-
People unwittingly set
We'll get to
themselves
that.
up
yeah.
for that trauma when they understandably like think they're entitled to a certain amount of reciprocity and they don't get it.
Right. And that's what we're getting to here, is like, in this survival mode, we don't care about the fact that what we're giving is supposed to be a gift.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time is, even back to what I was saying with the church and God's people, community, love, charity, there are so many things that we will give, and we will never receive that back. And it's because we're dealing with a lot of broken people. And the truth of the matter is that if we come in with that if we come out in without that mindset of survivalism, we can't guarantee that the other people don't have that. Because that's still very prevalent in humanity in general. Even in the church, there are plenty of people who do not understand the freedom that they have from death. There's still so many people, even when you think back to examples like, even with like the issue with the Syrian refugees, there was such a fight about that in the church because there were so many people who were just like, well, we need to protect ourselves. And it's just like, well, from a biblical standpoint, there are some things that are said by Jesus that are not actually in line with that mindset. Where he talks about giving, and he talks about giving completely. And he talks about being open. You know, if your brother strikes you, let him strike the other cheek, or turn the other cheek. If a man asks you for your coat, give him your cloak also. There's such a place of being free of the fear of death and punishment that comes with that, and that's required in order to actually even live that. And a lot of people don't have that. There are still so many people in the church who are completely out for themselves. But there is a place for us to be free of that. And even in what Paul's saying here, this little tidbit from this chapter, at the heart of it, there has to be that freedom to give freely, with or without. And to get into what you were saying about being open to receiving, that is actually another part of this. Because see, even if it is dangerous for us to expect to receive, in the sense of it's required, it's an entitlement, that's dangerous. But to expect something, that God's going to do something,
Yeah.
that this money will be used, that these people will be fed by the food that you provided, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
And even beyond that, being open to receiving, that's another aspect of this, because at the end of the day, even what Paul talks about here, is he talks about now he who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will also supply and increase your store of seed and will enlarge the harvest of your righteousness. He ends up talking about the natural reciprocity. I can't say that word very well.
Ressa.
That's a
That's a
hard
good
word.
word. But he talks about the natural element of that is giving in the church and what it's supposed to look like. And especially when it comes to the kingdom of heaven. And as we function in that as opposed to the world. We all are familiar with the concept of being in the world but not of the world. And there are a lot of weird kind of theologies that have been built around that. But at the end of the day, what that ultimately means is to be here in this world, but at the same time, more than that, to be a child of God in this world. And as a child of God, that sets us in a different framework, a different lifestyle, because we're representing the kingdom of God. We're a part of that. We are it. And that's the thing, is that being a part of that, it separates us from the way that the world works. And there's a place where we can understand that our provision comes from God. Our provision is going to come from God. And even back to from the identity stuff, all the way to this little thing, all of that stuff comes from Him. All of that stuff is to be received by us from Him. And see, there's a place where when it comes down to that giving thing and we don't receive what we expect, we can turn away from God because we're expecting something, because we're expecting that transaction to be fulfilled.
And we're offended.
Instead, though, what we should be able to do as we live in a place of functioning alongside God, and that was in that death mentality, that survivalist mentality, in a mentality where we understand that we are children of God and we are fully taken care of, fully provided for, what kind of mindset do you think comes with that when we don't receive? If we pour out ourselves to the community and expect love, but do not receive love, will that shatter us to the point where we refuse to give anymore? And that's the important thing here. Being open to receiving is very, very important, in the sense that it allows us the opportunity for us to receive everything, not just what we would expect, but also the things that we don't expect. The openness part of it comes into receiving even what God's going to do. Because sometimes, even in that place where you go, and you do this thing, you perform this service, or you give this gift, or you share this word, or this time for these people, and you expect that they're going to respond, sometimes they don't. Instead, it's something that God sends directly to you. But if you're not open to that because you're so focused on them, you'll completely miss the blessing. But there's a place for us to be open to receiving whatever that looks like, and be able to receive from God in everything, where He's honored by us, where He honors us in those places. Even to hear the words, like, I don't know if you guys have ever had God tell you thank you for something, or if you even believe that's something He would do, but I can tell you that it is. Because I've gotten to receive that before, and that was crazy because I didn't believe that was a thing. I didn't believe He ever would, so I actually fought with it and refused to believe in it for a while, until God fought me back. And it was just like, I thanked you, stop it. There's an importance though. I really appreciate what you said because it was cutting into the sermon, but whatever. But it brings that place for us to even look and to receive and to be open for more than just what the world has to offer. Because we're able to live in a place where we understand that we're not receiving from the world. However, where it does come in is that it helps build us up. See, the thing of it is that, going back to that word that I can't pronounce, if David would be so kind.
Reciprocity.
Reciprocity.
That's that one.
Atrocity. Okay.
There's a place where the way that the church is supposed to work in so many ways is to build off of itself. My giving, for example, to Jeremy, my giving my time, words that God's given me for him, even just going to God, receiving those and sharing them, my spending time with him, my work to help cultivate a relationship with him, sowing seeds with him in order so that he can grow in his relationship with God. Ideally, that will bring up a harvest in him that then he will be able to give back to me. And in this sense, the church is built up in and of itself. Even in this microcosmic way, it becomes the kind of thing where these two elements will function together in order to grow. And then when you extrapolate that out to where it is even just myself, for example, or Jeremy specifically, and his interactions with different people in the church as he's giving, as he's pouring out to the people around him, as he's doing those things that God has led him to do, whether it's providing a meal, or it's providing a word, or even just letting somebody cry on his shoulder, it builds up the body of the church in such a way that it actually can grow closer and stronger, and even grow further in its understanding of who God is.
And what we're.
See, the whole thing of it is that in many ways our giving should not hinge on whether or not we will get something back. The openness to receive is incredibly important, but our giving should come out of the fact that we want the best. We want the best for those around us. We want the best for God. We want the best for ourselves. Seeking to see everything grow. To see the kingdom of God grow. And in this way, in giving in particular, it becomes the kind of thing where that's the sowing of the seeds, even as Paul describes it. And it comes to a place where everybody can be made rich through their generosity, and where they can be thankful, where we can all sit in a place of gratitude, as opposed to a place of bitterness, entitlement, hurt, anger, disappointment.
Jesus said that it's more blessed to give than to receive, and if everybody was totally selfless, they would get to enjoy giving, and nobody would be without any lack.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's the best.
Yeah. So, it is that kind of thing to look at. And I think that we've all, if we're honest, we've all seen the fruit of giving out of places of, expectation, the negative kind of expectation, where it's about transactions, or entitlement, where we're demanding something. And the truth is that sometimes we can even be pushed back into that survival mindset by the events of this, because our giving is ultimately shaky. We're not really doing it for God. We're doing it because we want something from Him. And that sets us in a place where suddenly when we don't get that, or don't feel we got that, and that's a hard one too, because to be real about it, there are times where because we're not open to receiving, or if something God gives us doesn't actually look the way that we thought it would look,
Yeah.
it will actually put us in a place where we don't see that He's actually blessed us.
Yeah.
We were expecting something different, we wanted it to be something different.
We had the script in our head of what the camaraderie with God was supposed to feel like when it started to manifest, but then it just throws us off and feels surreal if it doesn't start out that way.
Yeah. And then suddenly we're completely missing who God is,
Yeah.
and that God has actually done what He said He was going to do. And then we get bitter and angry and push everybody away and go back to that survival mindset because, well, now I have to go get what I wanted. So it is one of these things to...
Singing is
Let's
bad.
celebrate
Yeah.
Can they sing it better?
the joy of keeping.
There are way
It's
too
one of
many
those songs
voices
we
on
know
that
it
one
keeps
too.
going.
Get it going. Anyway.
As if
Woo.
that weren't.
Yes,
Happy
I really
birthday, Will.
want the whole building to know.
1 year closer to death.
He's 99 years old.
Go in and announce that.
Yeah.
You're gonna die 1 year sooner now.
Wow.
So
I'm a realist.
Anyway.
We're talking about positive stuff here.
Anyway. So, at the end of the day, like, a lot of what this message is for is to even receive and understand the realities of what giving is supposed to look like. And even to look at our hearts and where we're not only where we're seeing that, but also where we're hoping to see it. Where we are giving in any of the vast facet of things, and we're seeing blessings. We're seeing God do what He says He's going to do, or where we're not. And then maybe to think about why. Where are our hearts really at? Because there are both places here, to celebrate and to convict.
Oh God, that thought torments me that I could be just like a well-intentioned narcissist and all along help everybody and do everything perfect ostensibly and then get like nothing out of it and
But
that's
then
all I was doing it for.
Is that not fear though? Is that not fear?
Heard about this.
That would be so complicated.
Fear.
I heard about this
And so convicting.
story like this guy. I don't know. He's up for like some FX show. Like FX. He's talking about how he's just like giving. Like he pretty much gave his whole life away. Like gave his spleen, gave his like organs, and then gave like his last part and like died. I don't know if that was a true story, but
It wouldn't surprise me. I've seen people like that where they take it too far.
yeah.
But, yeah. I think that's like an example of an unhealthy amount of giving.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, that's, when you're closer to
I look at that, like, when someone does stuff like that, it's more of like showing off, like trying to prove themselves.
Or
Trying to prove
duty.
themselves, yeah.
Huh?
Or duty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Or like when people, sometimes when I see on like Facebook when people like do like make a video of like them giving to the homeless and stuff. Sometimes I wonder if they're genuinely wanting to do it or they're doing
For their
it
hits.
for the hits, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think
And it's like if I were to go and give to homeless, I would record it.
Yeah. Well, I think
Don't
that
need to.
that was the thing. Like, was it Jesus who was saying, "Don't even let your right hand know what your left hand is doing when you give,"
Hmm.
because he was preaching specifically about the Pharisees and the way that they would go out in the public and
Yeah.
like honor themselves.
Yeah, yeah.
And he's like, "But when you give, Christians, when you give, don't even let your hands know."
Yeah.
I think that's a real thing, and that's a really important thing because it's really, even just to like go into that a little bit, there's a place for that. A lot of the time, even going back to the part about entitlement, about things like that, when we're giving like that, the expectation is to get back the validation that we want in order for people to see us that we're good as good people.
Yeah.
It's like we're putting on this performance for everybody in order to get what we want, which in reality, which we were talking about earlier with narcissists,
Yeah.
about how they'll do whatever they can in order to get that validation, to be seen the way that they like to be seen, or recognized specifically. And that's also dangerous, because that's purely, even going back to the people-pleasing thing that we talked about, throughout the course of the weeks, that can become a place where we're gaining our view of our motivation to give is coming from what other people think about us, how other people respond to us. There are a lot of people where what they ultimately give for is not for God, not for themselves, but they do give for other people. They give to other people, at least that's what it looks like, but at the end of the day, what it really is that it is for themselves, to make themselves feel better. They feel like if they give this, then they've made the world a better place. And even if that's not true, it makes them feel like they did something. And then they want other people to see it,
Yeah.
so that they can have other people know how good they are. So, I like that you brought that up, because that's another facet of this.
Me? Or?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure if you're talking to me or him.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny that you bring this up though, because I recently read a book called Go Giver that talks a lot about this kind of stuff. So,
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Anyway, though.
It also reminds me, like, from Batman, when the Joker throws money at Gotham, he's like trying to, show off or trying to, be a people pleaser, something
That's a
like
good
that.
example.
Which Batman?
Or the first one, with,
Oh, with
Yeah.
Jack Nicholson?
yes,
Yeah, okay.
Oh, I haven't seen
he's
that one.
throwing money, or
Yeah.
I've seen those.
Yeah.
it's been a long time since I've seen that.
Yeah. Because I was thinking about the other one, The Dark Knight, where he, like, burned all the money.
Ah,
Oh,
was
it's
just like-
been a while, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
probably that too. Maybe a reference.
But yeah.
It's a good example to show just how much money means to you, to see someone burn millions of it in a pile and see how you react.
Yeah. So again, I'll ask the questions just for the sake of finishing up. But the questions are, are you seeing where God is blessing you, where you're giving, and where you're receiving? And in that specific sense, are you receiving what you expect, or are you open to receiving more? And then the other question is, what are you not seeing? Where are you not receiving? And where is your giving, where is your heart really at in your giving? Where is it transaction based? Where is it obligation? Where is it cheerful? And then even to look at the reasons for why it is or isn't those things. Why do you feel like you're obligated to give this? Why are you cheerful about giving this as opposed to this thing? And even the last question is, are you even giving? Or are you so selfish that you've fallen into places where you just protect yourself and only yourself? because you feel like you're the only valid person to care about. And everyone else is dangerous, everyone else is a problem. Nobody deserves what you have because they're not worth it. And I think, and even though those questions seem to be kind of like reversed, because it feels like we're starting here and going down, the reason for that even is because sometimes when we look at where we're receiving, where we're not, and then that conviction comes, we look at the other part. And then what we can oftentimes find is that at the heart of it are these really, really nasty parts of who we're living as. I wouldn't say they're who we are, but they're certainly who we are choosing to be, for one reason or the other. Pain is often the biggest one motivator for it. So, that's what I got.